Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at irishbreakdown.com, and today we're going to talk about Notre Dame recruiting. What we're going to talk about is what Notre Dame has to do on the recruiting trail this year to close the gap on the big boys. That would be the teams that are competing for and winning championships on a consistent basis: Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State. Now, when you look at those teams and you look at Notre Dame, it is obvious that Notre Dame has closed the gap in recent seasons in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to on-field success. But the results on the field when Notre Dame plays those teams, for the most part, it has not changed. Obviously, there's the one exception of the Clemson game this year. That's the anomaly. There were circumstances behind it, but we're talking about going toe-to-toe and battling with those teams every time you play. It doesn't mean you win them all, but you at least need to be competitive. And the reality is, in 2 games against Alabama, in 2 of the last 3 games against Clemson, and in the last game against Ohio State, Notre Dame was only even competitive in 1 of those games when it came down to it. So there needs to be some improvements when it comes to the program in a lot of different ways. And one of those is closing the talent gap. I don't think the talent gap is as stark as it was 10 years ago, but it's still there, and it's something that Notre Dame needs to continue to fix. And the best way to do that is to recruit better. So today we're going to talk about Notre Dame's dream class, and we're going to begin with the defense. And here's what a dream class is for me. It's that class of recruits that are doable. So it's not like signing the number 1 player in the country at every position, and half those guys aren't even considering Notre Dame. It is players that are on the board for Notre Dame, players that have a level of interest in Notre Dame, even if Notre Dame is their 3rd or 4th school. They have to have some level of interest in Notre Dame. And there are players that, to me, would, as a group, close the gap, or as individuals, close the gap. So what is the class out there that Notre Dame can reasonably get? Again, it'll be challenging, but of course it's going to be challenging, but it's possible. What is the class out there that Notre Dame can get on defense that'll close the gap? Now, look, I would argue that the defense is much closer to being that championship caliber defense than they are on offense. And I think especially when you look at the year after year success since 2017, the defense has really been the strength of this football team. But I do believe there's another level they can get to that's beyond just coaching really well, which Notre Dame has been coached really well in the past few years. They will continue to be coached well moving forward. What is that class of players that gives them the talent to say you can match those other programs talent for talent? And that is what we are going to discuss today. So let's begin by talking about the defensive line. And we're going to first go to defensive end because that's a position group that Notre Dame is already 2/3 of the way there on. They already have Tyson Ford and Aiden Gabera. The 3rd member of my dream class would be DJ Wesolak. Now, if you remember, it was about a month ago, I was asked a question in a mailbag about DJ Wesolak, and I expressed some skepticism about whether or not he'd be the ideal player to add to this class. I've changed my mind on that, not because my opinion of DJ Wesolak has changed, because it hasn't. I always thought he was a good player. It's at the time, you looked at Tyson Ford and Aiden Gabera, and they both kind of projected more to be the big end. And so does DJ Wesolak. So there was nobody that I felt was sort of that true Viper position, and I felt they needed at least one guy that could definitely play that position. Well, we've watched Aiden Gabera come out as a junior because he's playing his junior season in the spring, and he has been outstanding. He's been very, very good. And not only has he been outstanding, but he's showing me traits and tools that should allow him to be a Viper and a Julian Okwara type of Viper. And so I think there's a lot more value to him now being able to play both sides. So now if DJ Wesolak can't play Viper, and you can always give him a shot at Viper, and if he sticks, then you're in great shape. But if he can't, you now have another player in Aiden Gabera who can play that position. So that makes it a much more balanced trio. Whereas before, I was concerned that you were getting 3 big ends. Now I feel like you're getting 1 big end, 1 Viper, and 1 guy in Wesolak that could play both. And that's the ideal situation that you're looking for there. Now, Notre Dame is going to continue to try to recruit Cyrus Moss. He would obviously, he's a legit game changer type of player. But right now, Notre Dame is on the outside looking in with him. So I don't see him as right now a viable option. They will continue, from talking to sources, they're going to continue to recruit him no matter who else they get in the class. And if you can get him, then that takes it even beyond a dream class. It is literally hitting a grand slam home run, bottom of the 9th of the World Series to walk off and win it. That would be that kind of huge pickup. But right now, if you give me a class of Tyson Ford, Aiden Gabera, and DJ Wesolak, combine it with what you've landed the last couple seasons, that is an outstanding group of defensive ends, and you're going to have plenty of talent to choose from. And now your margin of error has narrowed significantly because some of those guys aren't going to pan out. Notre Dame takes a lot of long, projectable guys. Some of them are going to get hurt. Some of them are not going to pan out. But there's so many players of the position now that have talent, that have length, that have athleticism. You're going to get 4 of those guys to pan out. And especially when you look at the conditioning and the coaching and the strength program that Notre Dame has, the odds are they've proven that this is a position where they're going to develop those players. Now let's talk about defensive tackle. This is an intriguing position because the way that Notre Dame has recruited that position in recent years, there's some guys on the board that people are projecting to go to Notre Dame that I just don't think Notre Dame should be taking right now. There are 2 guys on the board, however, that I think Notre Dame should look for, should push for. If you only get one of them, I'm pleased, very pleased. If you can get both of them, then obviously that's a huge year at defensive tackle recruiting. One is Caleb Artis from New York, very talented player, 6'5", 270, athletic. He can be a penetrating 3 technique. He could potentially grow into a player that could play some at the nose, and I even like potential of him being a 5 technique when they go to their 3-down looks. If you keep him, sort of somewhere in the range that he is now, he's at 270 now. If you keep him in the 280s, he could certainly be a guy that could play that 5 technique as well if you go to more of a 3-down look. Or you could continue to, if his body continues to get bigger and bigger and he blows up, then he's a guy that could also play some nose. So he's a really good athlete, bit of a low floor, high ceiling guy, which, again, I'm okay with. Notre Dame has had a lot of success with guys like that. I may be less okay with that at other positions that don't have that proven track record of development, but I think Mike Elson kind of deserves the benefit of the doubt when he looks at that raw projectable player with what he's done in recent seasons with guys like Julian Okwara, Khalid Kareem, Adi Takumba Ogundiji, guys like that, Isaiah Foskey. I think he deserves the benefit of the doubt because he's proven they can develop those types of players combined with the strength program. The big guy for me, though, is Anthony Lucas from Arizona. And if you're watching this on the YouTube channel, I'm going to pull up some highlights of Anthony Lucas, and I'm going to show you why I view him as a game changer type of recruit. If you're listening on the normal podcast, that's okay. We're going to kind of talk through what we see from him, and I'm going to explain to you why this is a big commitment. And first of all, I believe that elite defenses in today's game require greatness up the middle. You have to be very, very, very strong up the middle. And to me, as you watch these highlights of number 5, Anthony Lucas, what you're going to see is a guy that's 6'4.5", 6'5", 280 pounds, tremendous arm length, very powerful hands, and surprising athleticism. When I popped on the film the first time I watched Anthony Lucas, I was expecting a really good power player. I was not expecting a guy that you're going to see here in a clip or two coming up where he's playing as a 5 technique and rushing off the edge. I mean, that quickness that you see right there from him, he's stepping down and all of a sudden just plants and works outside to chase the quarterback. That's 280 pounds. That's not something you often see from a guy that weighs 280 pounds. Look at that hand play right there. This is just really, really impressive stuff. Look how long his arms are. He just discards that offensive tackle like it's nothing and gets to the quarterback. He is a special talent. And he's the kind of guy that if you can get a player like that, he can play 3 technique. I think he can play the nose. I think he's a guy that in a 3-3 alignment could be a defensive end. I mean, here's another pass rush right there. That's a guy coming off the edge at 280 plus pounds as a junior in high school. That's special talent. And he plays with force and power. He's the kind of guy that, yes, they've been getting very good defensive tackles in recent seasons. I would argue, would be the best they've seen. There's another clip of him coming off the edge. That is really, really impressive. Look how fast those hands are. He has a natural understanding of how to use his hands. Really, really like what you see from him. Notre Dame is in the mix with him. It's going to be tough. He is a guy that's being recruited by all the great programs. Texas is making a hard push for him. Are they able to get him? It's going to be tough, but he's the kind of guy that you have to go all in for as a coaching staff. And I believe that they are right now. Look at that spin move. He's the kind of guy that changes your fortunes inside. He's the kind of guy that when you line up against Clemson and you line up against Ohio State and you line up against Alabama, you're arguing that, hey, my best D tackle is just as good, if not better than your best D tackle. That's how good I believe Anthony Lucas to be. I'm encouraged by the things I've heard about his interest in Notre Dame. I'm also very encouraged by what I hear about the Notre Dame coaching staff and the work they're putting in on him to try to get him into the class. I've been told by multiple sources on both sides of this that Notre Dame is putting on the full court press, and that's exactly what you need to do. If you don't get him and you get Caleb Artis, that's fine. Caleb Artis is a good football player. But we're talking about a dream class that closes the gap, right? We're talking about things that Notre Dame can do based off players that are recruitable to Notre Dame. He's got the grades for Notre Dame. He's a kid that values the academic side of things enough to where he's strongly considering Notre Dame. And then, of course, as a football player, that's him catching a pass. If you're watching this on the YouTube channel, that is not him playing defense. That's him catching a pass as a slot player in the red zone at 280 pounds. Look at that. That's a game changer type of recruit. And that's why I say this is the kind of player that Notre Dame absolutely needs to get if they want to close the gap on the top teams. Now let's move on to linebacker. If there was a group in this class on either side of the ball that I would say I felt most confident that they were going to land an elite game-changing, program-defining, gap-narrowing class, it'd be linebacker. And the reason I say that is because, number one, I think they already have two guys that are part of that in Nolan Ziegler and Josh Burnham. But number two, there's so many guys on the board that are that level of player that Notre Dame either leads for or is in the top 2 or 3 for, that you say, boy, they only got to really land one of those guys to have a needle-moving class. If they can land 2 of those guys, it's program changing at the linebacker position, in my opinion, based on what I see. So let's kind of get into that group. Number 1 is Junior Tuihalamaka. Now, to me, he may have the lowest floor or the lowest ceiling of the guys left on the board, but he's certainly got the highest floor. And the reason he is in my class as the first guy I'm talking about is because at this point in time, when I look at all the linebackers on the board, that there's guys that can play Mike, but there's nobody that's a true Mike. Josh Burnham could play Mike, and I think that may eventually be a great position for him. But he can also play Will. He can also play Sam. He may even outgrow it and play Viper. I love that versatility he brings. But Tuihalamaka is a pure Mike linebacker. And if you land him, you can have him, Josh Burnham, play side by side and feel great about it. But he is a pure Mike. He also has the highest floor because he's the kind of guy that I just say he's going to be a good football player. Now, will he be a great football player? We'll find out. But he's going to be a good football player. Instinctive, good athlete. He's not tall, but he's long. He's got well above average arm length. Can rush the passer as a blitzer. He can come off the edge, and he is a thumper in the run game. To me, you add a guy like Junior Tuihalamaka to your class, and you've added the best middle linebacker in the country, in my opinion, the best pure Mike linebacker in the country. And when you can add the best player at this position in the country, you've clearly done something good. And that's why I say Junior Tuihalamaka is a guy that to me is a must get. And I know there's some talk about maybe you take a couple other guys instead of him. To me, he is got a guy you have to land because I believe he brings something unique to your roster that you don't have and the other guys on the board don't have, and that is the pure ability to play Mike. Could Josh Burnham play Mike? Yeah, maybe eventually, and he could potentially be very good at it. But he could also play other positions, and I don't know if we know for a fact yet that he would be a natural Mike, if that would be his best position. You know it is for Junior Tuihalamaka, and so that's why he is on my list as a guy you have to get. Now, where things stand right now, I think Notre Dame's his leader. Texas is pushing hard. Oregon, Stanford, and Arizona State are the other schools that make up his top 5. I like where Notre Dame is at right now. Now, he just started his junior season as well, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he does as a junior, because everything that I've said about him was based off sophomore film, which makes it even more impressive when you're showing that level of instinct and production as a sophomore against the schedule he plays. That's impressive. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he is going to do. There's three other athletic linebackers that to me hopefully would make up that 4th linebacker in this class. And if you can get one of those 3, I'm feeling really good about it. The first 2 are sort of an either or. I mean, it's hard for me to differentiate between the 2. I'm working on my linebacker big board right now where I'm breaking down and I rank all the linebackers, and I'm still having a hard time with those 2 guys. I go back and forth every time I break them down because they're so similar in skill set, and then they also have enough differences that you say, well, this guy could play here and that guy could play there. That makes them fun to break down, and that's Sebastian Cheeks from Illinois, Evanston, Illinois, and Jalen Sneed from South Carolina. Now, Jalen Sneed is an interesting player because he's sort of new to the board. He was someone that was offered after Marcus Freeman was hired. He is a guy that is considered, he's the typical guy that you look at and say, yeah, that guy's going to play in the SEC somewhere. He's 6'1", he's 210, 215 pounds, incredibly athletic, still a very raw player, still learning how to play the game, as most guys of that age are. Played outside linebacker as a sophomore, played more as a defensive end as a junior at 6'1", 210 pounds, if that says about how strong and physical this young man is. I love his upside. He's an incredibly athletic, powerful player, but again, there's a lot of room for work. Sebastian Cheeks is another interesting player. I just saw some highlights. It was only about 8 to 10 plays of his junior season. And again, there's a lot of film I got to dive into. It was just highlights, but I loved what I saw from him. It looks like he's filled out his frame. He was very undersized as a sophomore. Illinois just started playing their junior season, and I liked what I saw. He's physical, but he looks to at least be 10, 12 pounds bigger than he was as a sophomore. He was playing running back, and he was showing some speed. So he's another guy that you look at and say, maybe he could play some Rover, maybe he could play Will, maybe he could play Sam. But he's just a really talented player, and he's from right down the street. And so you look at it and say, boy, is there a scenario in which Notre Dame could take 5 linebackers and get Cheeks and Sneed? If they could do that and they could make room for all 5, then do it. I mean, they're just that good and they're that close in talent. Cheeks, I would argue, has a higher floor. I think their ceilings are very, very similar between Sneed and Cheeks. I would also argue Cheeks is probably a little taller. Sneed looks to be a little bit longer from an arm length standpoint. But these are two just outstanding football players, and Notre Dame has to be able to get one of them. Cheeks, I don't know where things stand. I know he likes Notre Dame a lot, but I've said this before in recent days. It concerns me that he has been so high on Notre Dame, has been close to committing to Notre Dame a couple times, according to a couple sources that we have, but he hasn't been able to pull the trigger. And you ask yourself, why? He's visited campus, so it's not that he can't visit. He's been on campus, I believe, multiple times. Is there another offer he's waiting on? Is he waiting on an Ohio State offer? Is he waiting on an Alabama offer? I don't know. I mean, he's got a pretty impressive offer list already. It could just be as simple as he just wants to wait until his junior year's over to do it. It could be that simple. So I don't know if there's an issue there, but it just, having done this a long time, it just concerns me when a local kid waits as long as he's waited and just won't pull the trigger, especially when he's visited. So hopefully Notre Dame can close the deal with Sebastian Cheeks and get him into class. Then you can figure out kind of what you're going to do with that next spot or two. Jalen Sneed is visiting Notre Dame today. If you're listening to this podcast on Monday, it is today. He's supposed to be on campus today. He was at an Under Armour event yesterday, dominated. We had some people down there at that event, talked to them, and his interest in Notre Dame is high. There's a connection there. His head coach and Marcus Freeman have known each other for a very long time. Jalen Sneed is a kid who really values the academic side of things, needs to get up on campus, and we'll see it. Today's visit is going to go a long way towards determining if Notre Dame's going to be a real player here. Anna Hickey from the Clemson 247 sports site put a crystal ball up for Notre Dame with Jalen Sneed. According to the people that talked to him at the Under Armour event in Atlanta yesterday, he does not seem to be in any hurry to make a decision. He said he wants to visit Notre Dame. He wants to visit Clemson again. There's several other programs he wants to visit. It sounds like he wants to take some officials over the summer and then decide after that before his senior season. That's the plan going into today's visit. Now, as we've seen in the past, Notre Dame visits can be game changers for kids, especially young people who've never been to campus before and are guys that are from further away. So perhaps he comes on campus, falls in love with the town, falls in love with the campus, and realizes that, hey, numbers are getting a little tight now, and decides he wants to join the class. Could that happen? Sure. But just based on what he said yesterday at the Under Armour camp in Atlanta, he's likely going to take some time with his decision. So unless something changes today, that is what we're looking at happening. Now, there's also Devin Jackson on the board. And to me, this is the most difficult one to evaluate. There's a lot of people like Devin Jackson. ESPN ranks him as a top 100 player, and I get it. He's 6'1", 6'2", 200 pounds. Here's the issue I have with Devin Jackson. He has the body of a safety, really. Like I said, 6'1", 6'2", 200 pounds, based on sophomore film. We have not seen him as a junior because his county in Nebraska, even though the rest of the state had fall football, his county decided not to play. So he didn't get a chance to play as a junior. So I haven't seen his junior film yet. I don't know if he's filled out much like some of these other guys have filled out. I would imagine there's room for him to fill out, but I don't think he's got a great frame anyway. The issue with that is You could say, well, that's fine. Jeremiah Wusu had a similar frame too. Very true. The difference is when I watch Devin Jackson on film, he plays like a defensive end. He has the game of a defensive end. And I just don't know. I'm not as confident that he can move to linebacker as I am other players. I just haven't seen him drop. I haven't seen him do some of the things athletically that you would need him to do. So it's not that he can't play linebacker. This is me saying, I don't know. I don't know if he can do that. And so that creates a little bit more of a gap in evaluation or projection compared to the other top players. In most years at linebacker, it's a no-brainer. You take Devin Jackson and you're thrilled with it. In this class, where you've already got two great players in the class and you've got players like Tuialamaka, Cheeks, and Snead on board as well, I think you have to think twice about how quickly you might take his commitment. Now, he put Notre Dame in his top 5, and it doesn't sound like he's necessarily in a deciding soon mode either. But it makes for difficult analysis when you look at those 4 players. If Devin Jackson came to Notre Dame and committed to Notre Dame, would I have anything negative to say about that? Absolutely not. Like I said, he's an outstanding athlete and a very talented football player. It's just we're comparing 4, in my opinion, great players, 4 guys that, in my view, would be needle movers, including Devin Jackson. We're at the point now at the linebacker class where it's like, and this is what I said at the beginning, which one of these studs do you want to take? How are you prioritizing these studs in your class? And that's the unique aspect of this whole thing, is that you're in a win-win-win-win with these 4 players. You get any combination of these 4, and it's a great class. I'm simply looking at it from the standpoint of how do you build the absolute best class? And part of it for me, when you talk about building the best class, is also building the class that not only has a very high ceiling, but has the higher floors. My issue with Devin Jackson is I feel like he has a lower floor than those other players because there is so much projection that you have to make with whether or not he can play linebacker, where all those other 3 guys we've seen play linebacker to some degree. So that's why I sound more hesitant on Devin Jackson, but hear me, right? I don't think ESPN's nuts for having him in the top 600. Actually, I think they have him in the top 60. I believe I'd have to go look at this again, but I believe the last I saw he was like ranked 51st in the country. They're not nuts for having him ranked that high. I personally would have him lower top 100, maybe top 125 to 150. But again, that's because of the floor. The upside, the ceiling is there. He's a talented player. And if you were to get him, if you're Notre Dame, you're not going to feel bad about that. It's just of those 4 players, trying to create some order for the dream class, give me the guys with the higher floors along with the higher ceilings. And that's, to me, how you put it together. And that's how I evaluate the linebacker class. But if Notre Dame lands one of those 4 players with Burnham and Ziegler, this is an outstanding linebacker class. In my opinion, it'd be one of the 5 best linebacker classes in the country. If they land 2 of the guys that I just talked about, I don't see anybody in the country having a better linebacker class. And when you're having that conversation about a group, a position group, it certainly moves the needle. It certainly closes the talent gap. And there's enough versatility in this group that it could eventually impact other positions. And that's exactly what you want. And it just shows that Marcus Freeman, in very, very short period of time, has shown at Notre Dame that you can go around the country and recruit the best players. You can go into the backyard of great teams and take their best players and build a recruiting class that's not just all about development, but has genuinely elite, highly ranked, talented players in the class. And Notre Dame is on the verge of doing just that at linebacker. And if they do it, it is certainly a talent gap closing group. Let's talk about the safety position. This is a position that is, to me, the one I have. The 2 secondary positions are the one right now that, to me, are the most shaky when it comes to, will Notre Dame be able to close and land the guys that they want for different reasons. Number one is at safety, there's some players on the board. There's some players that I like. There's some guys that I've added to this breakdown. There's one player that I'll add to this breakdown based on what I've seen from him so far that wasn't on my written version of it. But there's now 4 safeties, in my opinion, that Notre Dame has to get 2 of. A couple of them are highly ranked players. One of them is, and a couple others are more projectable type of players, but very, very talented players. So number 1, the big fish at safety is Xavier Nwakpa. He is a top 100 player from Iowa. 247 Sports ranks him, I believe, in the top 25 nationally. That's, to me, where I see him. I think they're spot on with their analysis of him. to me, he's a borderline top 50 player. He's a borderline 5-star player. He's a borderline, he is a difference maker at safety. He's 6'2", he's 190, he's athletic, he's rangy, he's instinctive, he can hit, he can cover, he can play center field, he can do it all, and he can play receiver. I mean, he would be a legit 4-star receiver if you wanted to recruit him at receiver. He's got that kind of skill and athleticism. He's the kind of guy that changes your program. Now, Ohio State's considered the leader. I think they're going to be very hard to beat, but Notre Dame is in it. And he is one of those guys that, for me, it's going to all be about, can you get him to hold out long enough to not commit before visits? If you can get him to commit to visits, then I think Notre Dame's going to have a chance. I think if he gets on campus and meets Mike Mickens and Marcus Freeman and Chris O'Leary face-to-face, sees what Notre Dame's all about, the things I've read about him, there's just a lot about Xavier that to me strikes me as he's the kind of kid that would get on campus and Notre Dame goes from like fourth to first on his list. I think he's that kind of guy. He's just one of those guys that Notre Dame and him are going to click really well if it gets to that point. Now, will that happen? That remains to be seen. And if you're Ohio State, you're going to try to get him in the class before he makes his decision. I mean, this is a kid that's being recruited by everybody. So it's going to be a challenge to get him in the class, but he is a guy, to me, that you have to make the effort for. You have to go all in for. If you don't get him, you don't get him. But he's a guy that you absolutely have to go after if you're Notre Dame. Now, the next two safeties that I look at are not highly ranked guys. They're not guys that are considered top 100 players, but when I watch their film, I just see talent. I see range. I see really athletic players. And if Notre Dame can somehow get either one of them in the class, that would be big. And if those are the two these next two guys are the two safeties, then I'm very happy with that. And that is Jaden Mangum in Michigan and then Jake Pope from Georgia. Now, Jaden Mangum's an interesting player. He seems to like Notre Dame a lot. He's a guy that's listed at 6'3", 380 pounds. He actually looks like he might even be a little taller than that. But even at 6'3", he's got tremendous range, tremendously long arms, very talented, gifted athlete. Still growing into his frame a little bit, and I think that limits his raw explosiveness a little bit. But he's a guy that I view as he matures and kind of stops growing, that he is going to then see another burst. There's going to be another step for him. But even without that, he's very athletic. He's long. He reminds me a lot of Kyle Hamilton. He's not quite as big or as explosive as Kyle Hamilton, but there's very similarities in how they play. He's a good receiver too. Two-way player. I like him a lot. He's a guy that I say if you can get a 6'3", 180+ pound kid with a great frame at safety, and you go into the state of Michigan and steal him from the Wolverines and the Spartans, again, that's another big recruiting battle. It's going to be hard to get him out of the state. I think even harder to get him out of state than it was to get Ziegler and Burnham. Ziegler was a no-brainer to Notre Dame if they wanted him. He grew up a big Notre Dame fan, but Burnham grew up a Michigan fan. And so getting Jaden Mangum out of state is not going to be easy, but it's doable. And I think he's the kind of guy that if you could get him in this class, that gives you a very strong foundation to build upon to go with last year's class of Justin Walters and Kerry G. So he is one. Jake Pope is 6'2", 190, athletic. For some reason, he's only considered a 3-star recruit by most people. I don't get it. I watch his film. He comes from a great high school, Buford High School in Georgia. Very athletic, tremendous two-way player in high school. I just don't see what they're not seeing. I see a guy that's a top 100 to 150 caliber player. The problem is his dad played at Clemson, and Clemson wants him. So it's going to be very hard to get him from Clemson. But he says all the right things about Notre Dame. Notre Dame's considered one of his top 4 or 5 schools just from talking to different people. It sounds like they're in it. It's just going to be hard. So you get one of those two guys in Xavier Nwankpa, you have a great safety class. If you get those two guys, it's a really good safety class. If you get one of those guys in Sherrod Colville from Virginia, again, it's a very good safety class. Now, he's the new guy to my list. Now, I've watched his film before. I like him. He's from Virginia, so that's something that I always like. I always like when Notre Dame recruits Virginia guys. But he's a guy that I didn't think had interest in Notre Dame. As I've done some more digging on this, it sounds like his interest in Notre Dame is legitimate. So that's why I've added him to the list. It's not that I've evaluated him differently or view him differently as a player. It's just that I view him as a guy that can be more of a player to that Notre Dame can be a player for. And he's a very good player. He's part of a dream class scenario. And so I really like what I see from him. He's more of a strong safety alley type of player. So you'd have to complement another guy with him. But that's what I like about Pope and Mangum. If you get Koval and Pope and Mangum, you've got sort of that center fielder types that can also play in the alley. And then you got Koval, who could be, he's listed at 6 foot 185, but he's a hammer. I mean, he wants to come down and he wants to fill the alley and hit people. I love that about him. There's another safety that I've seen that I'm contemplating putting him in this list, but I'm not sure yet. I want to see some senior film. And that's Devin Moore from Naples, Florida. There's a lot I like about Devin Moore. We talked about him in a recent podcast with John Garcia. He's a guy that Notre Dame's in his top group, I believe top 5. He plays some corner, plays some safety, and I really like him, but I'm not sure if I am ready to put him in that dream class category yet. I'm going to have to watch even more film of him, but if Notre Dame got him, that's a win. That's a win. And if you have him with one of the other guys I've talked about, I really like that safety class. It's just more about, do I view him as a guy that moves the needle or closes the gap, or is he a guy that keeps doing what you've been doing, and what you've been doing has been really good? That's my only question with Devin Moore. And if I had to make a decision today, I'd probably lean towards putting him in that talent gap category. But again, I just need to see more of him. I'm just trying to be honest. I haven't watched him quite as much. I haven't watched game film of him where I've had game film of a lot of these other players. So I'm still sort of in that decision-making mode with Devin Moore. I want to see some camp film in the senior year before assuming he's even still on the board by then, before I put him into the dream class category. But what I have seen from him already, he'd be a good pickup. No question. He'd be a good pickup. But you just would then need to he'd have to be your floor. He'd have to be the lowest of the guys that you get. But he's a good football player, and I really like where Notre Dame stands with him. And let's wrap up with cornerback. Now, I have three guys written in my dream class article, and that's simply saying, like, this is just, again, perfect world scenario. You get all 3 of them. If we're talking practically, I think you may only have room for 2 of them. I think if you can get these 3, then I look at it and say, that's the dream, right? But if you just get 2, and one of them would be Jaden Mangum, then I think you can live with that. It just depends on, how you view it. So, like, there's players out there like Nikai Martinez, who's a good football player, and different players out there that I say, yeah, these guys would be part of it too. Rylan Gandy's a guy that I like, who's a raw, fast guy. Jared Kerr, those guys are all good football players. And if Notre Dame were to land one of those guys with Jade Mickey, that's a good corner class. But again, this is the position more than any other that you could say there's a clear talent gap between Notre Dame and everybody else. That wasn't true in 2018 when you had Troy Pride and Julian Love, but where you are now, there's a talent gap with what Notre Dame is producing at cornerback and what Alabama and Ohio State, and even to a degree Clemson, have been producing at cornerback in recent seasons. And so this is the position where you need to close the gap. And there are players on the board that can do that. We talked about Jaden Mickey already. The other one is Kamari Rogers. And anyone that listens to this podcast on a regular basis knows I think Kamari Rogers is a tremendous player. Is he going to be hard to get out of the South? Absolutely. Is he an elite player? Absolutely. And he's the kind of guy that, to me, Notre Dame just doesn't get. They just don't get this kind of player. This is just not the kind of guy that on a consistent basis Notre Dame has been able to go out and land. And I'm going to pull up some highlights here up. Kind of dive into this, and so you can kind of watch why I like him. You're going to see great feet. You're going to see incredibly fluid hips. You're going to see very instinctive player. He plants and drives, reads that route, and takes it back to the house. The other thing I like about Kamari Rogers is he's very raw. I mean, he's still a young, developing player that just has a natural instinct for the game. He's got a natural intelligence for the game. He's got some toughness. And he's just scratching the surface. No, he's not this guy that you see like a Derek Stingley who just physically is ready to play in college as a junior in high school. Kamari's not there yet. He's got some growing up to do physically still. And that's kind of what excites me, because he's that good at corner despite being a guy that needs time to grow and develop. And he would be, to me, a program-changing type of player. He's from the state of Mississippi. That means he's going to be hard to get, right? I mean, that's just a fact. Notre Dame doesn't dip into Mississippi very often. But the thing I like about him is there is a genuine interest there. Mike Mickens has been on all over him. Marcus Freeman has been all over him. The staff is doing a great job of putting the full court press on him. So they're giving themselves a chance. Would I bet on Notre Dame right now? No, I would not. If he committed to Notre Dame right now, would I feel as confident he's going to stick as other players? No, I would not. And has nothing to do with Kamari Rodgers. It just has to do with doing this and following recruiting for 15, 20 years. These are the recruitments that are much the hardest for Notre Dame to get and to keep. So, but that's the kind of thing you need to do, though, to change the program, right? I mean, this is what this whole conversation is about. What do you have to do to close the gap? Well, to close the gap, this is the kind of guy you need to get. This is exactly the kind of player that you can land that says, okay, we're a serious player. This is who we are, and we're going to go to battle with anybody. So if you can get a guy like that into your program, I mean, that's how you move the needle. There's another player that's a 7-on-7 teammate of him named Jair Brown that is also looking to Notre Dame. He's originally from Louisiana, moved to Ohio within the last year, played in Ohio this past year. He's a guy that, to me, that Notre Dame has a shot at, but flipping a DB from Ohio State is going to be extremely difficult to do. He is a guy that I would say unlikely, but you go for him. Big, physical, complete opposite of Kamari Rodgers. He's more of a ready-to-play-now kind of guy physically. Not quite the athlete that Kamari Rodgers is, but instinctive, shows great leadership ability, physical, smart, would be a really, really good boundary corner for Notre Dame. And so I really like that in his game. There's another corner that I'm evaluating right now that intrigues me that if we did this in a week or two, I'd probably add him to the list. And he's a guy that I want to see more junior film of, and that is Ephesians Prysock. Now, first of all, best name in the class, right? Ephesians Prysock. Like when you have that kind of name, you're just going to be a good football player, it would seem. But he's a really intriguing player for me. He's 6'3", 170 pounds. I saw a picture of him the other day where he was in his like corner stance, like squatted like he's playing press man, and his fingertips were almost on the ground. That's how long his arms are. The reason he's so intriguing to me, number one, is not only is he talented and athletic, but he could potentially be incredibly versatile as well. Could play boundary, could play field, could play nickel, and maybe even safety, depending on how he fills out. He's from the same high school as Junior Tuihalamaka. Now, before I popped the film on of Ephesians Prysock, and I had seen some sophomore film, and it was good. I saw some freshman film, and it was good, but I hadn't watched him in a while. When I saw that they were on him, I just kind of assumed that they were recruiting him to because he was, teammates with Junior Tuihalamaka. Then I popped in the sophomore film, and then I found some camp film and some 7-on-7 film and completely changed my view on him. Now, I have more film to watch, and I want to see him play as a junior. So, again, this is similar to other players I've talked about where I just haven't seen as much from him, so I'm not willing to put him in this category yet. But I have a feeling when I pop in junior film and evaluate Ephesians Prysock and do more of a film dive into him, that I'm going to come back and say, yeah, add this guy to that list. Because what I have seen from him is really good. He's athletic. He's incredibly long. He's smart. So I think he's a guy that give me a month to watch some of his junior film because they just started their junior season. And he's a guy that I would look at and probably say, this is a guy in that group as well. And Notre Dame just made us, I think, top 6. So they are in that mix as well. So that is my dream class. And the way I look at it is this. Is Notre Dame going to land all those guys? No. I tried to give you some ors, this guy, or this guy. So that way it's not if I just said Jaden Mangum and they got Jake Pope or Sherrod Colville or those other players, then it would seem like, well, that guy wasn't on your list. Or if they only landed Anthony, or they didn't land Anthony Lucas but got Caleb Artis and I didn't have Caleb Artis on the list, you'd say, oh, well, he wasn't a good player. And I did the same thing at linebacker. So there's a big list of guys that to me would be needle movers for Notre Dame, but it's more about as a whole, what kind of group are they putting together? And to me, the more guys you get from this discussion, from this list right now, the closer you are to having that kind of class. If Notre Dame can go get half the players on this board, that's a really strong class that moves the needle a little bit. The more you get beyond that, the more they move the needle. I mean, it's not that hard to figure out. So I feel great about where they are right now. I feel great about the fact that the staff has put themselves in striking distance with a lot of these players. Now the key is finishing. Can they finish with a lot of these guys? And if they can, then this class has a chance to be special. This class has a chance to be Notre Dame's best defensive haul of the Brian Kelly era. And that's saying something because they've had some really good defensive classes in the past. So we'll find the next 9 months before the early signing period are going to be very interesting. We don't know when visits are going to open back up again. I would imagine, if I had to guess, I would say by summer they will have opened visits up to some degree. I hope that happens and needs to happen. But that's going to be a key. If Notre Dame can't get visits between now and December, it's going to make it a lot harder for them to get these guys. I didn't view it as an excuse last year because so many of the players in last year's class had been to campus before. This class is a little different because a lot of these kids that are out of state haven't been on campus. And so unless they can get them on campus some way, shape, form, or fashion, it's going to be very challenging without official visits to get some of these guys on campus, just because from the means they can't do it. So that's where we stand with defensive recruiting. Tomorrow, we will talk about the offensive dream class. That one's a little bit more skeptical. I'm a little bit more skeptical of them finishing with the kind of dream class that they need on offense as I am on defense. I feel good about where Notre Dame is on defense right now. I think it's very doable. Offense is going to be a little bit more challenging, but we'll dive into that and we'll talk about the players that are on the board for that. Make sure you are subscribed to our podcast wherever you get your podcast from. You can also always listen to our podcast at irishbreakdown.com. And if you are listening on YouTube, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification button, help us grow this channel so that we can continue to bring you more and more great Notre Dame content. So thanks for listening, and we will talk to you all again very soon.